I wanted to thank you for coming here, and I'm going to talk today about remote and local file inclusion, LFI and RFI, and I'm Tal Be'eri, and I'm a research team leader at Imperva, and Imperva is a company that provides solutions for data and application security. And let's talk about what are we going to discuss today in this presentation. We're going to discuss a little bit, give some background about PHP and PHP internal. This will serve us throughout this presentation in order to better understand both exploits and mitigation. We will briefly discuss remote file inclusion basics. We will analyze some RFI shell caught in the wild that exploits the theme thumb vulnerability, and we will then demo more advanced remote file inclusion using PHP streams and wrappers, which is not new but less known. Then we will talk about local file inclusion, LFI, and we will present some new variation to edit file content in order to embed malicious PHP code and also evade all AV detection, and then suggest a way to mitigate that threat. And finally, we will conclude with our observation about remote and local file inclusion in the wild, and also propose a mitigation solution based on community reputation data. And so let's talk about RFI and LFI. PHP is all around. We will see in the next slides that PHP is by far the most popular server-side code environment. And this is on one hand, and on the other hand, successfully exploiting RFI and LFI vulnerabilities leads to full server takeover, which is, well, the holy grail of hacking. And therefore, it should come as no surprise that hackers are actively attacking. And just an example was over last year where a vulnerability was discovered in a popular WordPress extension, theme thumb, that led to the compromise of more than 1 million web pages. And taking all of these facts into account, still you can see that RFI and LFI does not we feel it does not get the proper attention from the security community, and we consider it OWASP top 10 ranking that included RFI in the top 10 of 2007, but then it was dropped on 2010, and you cannot find some explicit mentioning of RFI in the current OWASP top 10. So we mentioned that PHP is very popular, and in fact it's the most popular server-side programming language in the world. And these stats are taken from w3tech.com site, and they show that almost 4 out of 5 servers run PHP on them. So it's pretty impressive. And one could say that, okay, maybe just small sites run PHP, but you know, bigger sites will go with the other platform. But taking a look at the top 6 sites as ranked by Alexa, and you can see that 3 out of the 6, Facebook, Baidu, and Wikipedia, is run with PHP. Underneath.
Yahoo runs PHP as well.
What? Yahoo? So, correction, 4 out of 6. So, great. Okay, so once that we believe that PHP is very, very popular and therefore a lucrative target, let's talk about the internals of PHP. So when PHP engine sees a PHP file, the PHP parser starts in the beginning on HTML mode, which really tells the parser ignore everything until you hit PHP's opening tag, which is typically angle bracket question mark PHP, but there are other ways, such as the short opening tag, which consists only of angle bracket and question mark. And now the parser is really working and compiling, and we will see a slide about it on the next slide. And when the parser hits the end the tag, then it drops back to HTML mode and just ignore everything until it hits the opening tag again. And this feature really allows mixed coding, which is a nice feature. If we take a look at the example, here is the control of the program is reading in PHP and if-else directives, but the output is only HTML. So we will see in a couple of slides how it works under the hood, this PHP and non-PHP coding, how it coexists together. So when the parser really is not ignoring things, what does it do? Well, the first step is to parse the, and it's really the same with all interpreted code. First, the code is being parsed, and then it's being compiled into opcodes, and then these opcodes are executed by the PHP engine. And in order to gain visibility and have some kind of a probe somewhere between the second and the third stage, the second being the compiling and third being the execution, we will use the VLD extension, which is the Vulkan Logic Disassembler that was written and maintained by Derek Rathens. It's a PHP extension. You can download it for free from picklephp.net. And this extension is used to dump the opcodes of compiled PHP scripts. And it also gives you the opportunity to only compile the code, but not execute it. So you just want to take a look at the opcode generated by the PHP file, but you don't want to execute it. And we will use that feature. So if we will look again in the example we had seen earlier, and we will find out how this mixed coding works. So the parser compiled the if to jump 0, jump z opcode. Then the HTML was transformed. It's just being echoed, just being printed out. You can see it highlighted. It's just being printed out to the screen, and then the else is again is transformed to jump, and again the HTML being a non-PHP code is just being echoed. So what the parsing and compiling in HTML mode is really just echoing everything that you find until the start token of PHP, the begin token of PHP. So let's go to the include function, and the include statement includes and evaluates the specified file, and it's being used to share code by reference. Let's say that you have a header that you want to present in all of your files in all of your web pages, then you would include this file in your PHP code. And since PHP version 4.3, remote files are also a valid include targets. So you can have this header that we mentioned sit on some other side. And last point about include, the parser drops to HTML mode at the beginning of the included file. So the file is being parsed from the beginning, just like it would have been if it had been accessed directly and not by include, which typically says the parser starts by ignoring everything until it hits the begin tag. So there's this saying that eval is evil. And because you don't want to run and evaluate some arbitrary code determined in runtime. So I want you to meet eval bulimic sister, include. Not only does she evaluate arbitrary code, but she eats everything before the code, because in HTML mode, code can be prepended with anything, and that includes binary content. And she loves dining out. And the code can reside outside of the application. So if you think eval is evil, then include should be mega evil or something like that. And so let's show you a small example of RFI. This vulnerable application just includes a request file. The target of the include is passed as parameter, and using the exploit, the attacker places its malicious code over in a site that he owns, and just and this file gets executed by the application. And even though the application intended to use the include just to, in that case, just to get some variable from it, and now this include is really running code in the context of the server. And if it looks a little bit childish example, well, we will show that very similar attack is taken down and infected more than 1 million pages just last year. And in order, I just wanted to say something about our setup for that. We have in Imperva something we call Hacker Intelligence Initiative, HII, and we are collecting and analyzing security logs, and thus it enables us to observe and tap into real security incidents in real time. And we currently have 40 web applications that we are analyzing their logs, and it's growing over the time. So using that setup, we were able to see the TimSump exploitation taking place. So TimSump is a WordPress extension to produce thumbnail pictures, and it was reported as vulnerable to remote file inclusion, and reports in the news cited that more than 1 million exploited pages were exploited during that campaign. And this is beneath the screenshot of the shell that we will discuss in the coming slides. But first, let's talk about where the shell were hosted. And this is just an example. This shell was hosted on Picasso.com, .movies, etc., and it really used that the Picasso.com subdomain to evade the TimSump filter. Well, TimSump knew they were including pages, and it could lead to some security problems. So they said, okay, let's confine ourselves only to some predefined sites such as Picasso.com, because we trust Picasso.com, but the filter was not implemented correctly, and Picasso.com.x.com was considered to be Picasso.com. So this is the first interesting thing in this exploitation. And if we take a look at the shell code, we can see it starts with GIF 89 header, and which is the GIF file identifier, but then switches to encoded PHP. Of course, it doesn't disturb the include function, as we've seen that since it's the parsing is done in HTML mode, then everything gets ignored until the real code starts somewhere after that header. And this is used to evade another team some security filter and said, okay, we're including files, but we only want to include from known sources, and also only include pictures such as GIF. But their check was not implemented correctly, and also, even if it had been implemented correctly, we will see that you can really embed your code in valid picture file. This is not a valid picture file. If you try to view it with picture viewer, you won't see anything. So let's talk about the code itself. And the execution of the shell is controlled with additional HTTP parameter, LOL and OSC, and we have modified this shell slightly, so it and we can see also here that the shell is the code itself is compressed and base 64 decoded to obfuscate the code. So we just change the shell a little bit. So instead of evaluating that code, it would just echo the code. So we will see what's going on and not evaluate some malicious code. And what we've seen that if no parameters are supplied, then this shell is really a file upload shell, allowing to upload arbitrary files to the infected host. If the LOL parameter is present, then a set of predefined commands are being executed. Also, some statements of nobody crew and so forth are also presented in the infected page. And if OSC parameter is present, then the value of OSC gets executed. So OSC probably stands for OS command. So it's really a command shell on the infected server. So and this shell, or very similar to it, had infected more than a million pages. So it's a relevant threat. Okay, let's move on to other way of exploiting RFI, remote file inclusion, and by using PHP streams. And streams are a way to generalizing file, network, data compression, and other operations to give some uniform interface that deals with the input stream and output stream. So we have the usual HTTP, FTP, and so forth, but we also have some non-standard and less known streams such data, file, zlib, and so forth. And hackers can use these kind of streams in order to attack. And well, from the hacker objectives, we want to run the following code, the PHP info on RFI vulnerable app, but this time no shell hosting is allowed. This is the hacker's objective, and it can be done using the data wrapper. So we will base 64 encode our attack vector, and then we'll wrap it up with the data wrapper, which is here, data text plain, and then the coded code. And as we can see that, well, I'm not sure you can see, but this really runs on the server. So mission accomplished from the hacker point of view. So what is it good for? Well, why hacker use this PHP streams? Why not stay with the known HTTP, HTTPS, and so forth exploitation method? So first of all, many security filters that use signatures and blacklisting of input only look for exploit with the standard protocol. So signatures such as, let's say, mod security signatures only look for the vulnerable parameter, and then immediately, if there is some kind of protocol, it knows. So it looks for HTTP, HTTPS, FTP, and FTPS, but it doesn't look for data or PHP or something like that stream. So it's a good way to evade some signatures. Also, it allows allows the hacker to hide or obfuscate the attack source, as you can use these streams to compress or base64 encode, so the target is not present in plain text. And as we had just seen, you can compromise without having to host a shell in your malicious site. So that way, the hacker has one less thing to worry about getting its payload to site, and it's really, and since some companies are monitoring this site, reporting, blacklisting this URL, so it's really a way to attack without having to host the shell anywhere else. Okay, so let's move forward to local file inclusion. So again, the question is why hackers use it? Because well, remote file inclusion seems to be much easier. In local file inclusion, the file has to be local, has to be uploaded to the attacked environment, to the attack server. So this is require extra work. Why should the hacker bother with it when it can just host it wherever he likes? So, and this is because RFI nowadays is disabled by default. And since PHP version 5.2, a new PHP INI directive was introduced, which is called Allow URL Include, and it's set to be off. And as we can see, another stats taken from W3 Tech, about 90% of PHP deployments are of version higher than 5.2. So although RFI is very relevant, and we just saw that it compromised, attacked and compromised many sites, but again, the weight has shifted towards version higher than 5.2, where RFI is disabled by default, so hackers don't have a choice and have to move on to local file inclusion. So, how to be local? Well, there are two main options to the hackers to get their code uploaded locally. And the first one is to abuse existing file write functionality within the server and the log files. If we can get our code into some kind of log, and then we will manage somehow to include it, then we will be okay, and we will have our code stored locally and run locally with the LFI vulnerable page. Another option is many web 2.0 applications allows their users to upload user-generated content, such as pictures, to the server. So if we can some way smuggle into our picture, let's say, or any other file, the PHP code, and then upload it to the server, then it's another way to get our code to be local. And let's demo both of these options. So this time, the hacker's objective is to run the PHP info locally, because the allow URL include is now set to be off. And we will use proxy to show it, but it's not mandatory. There are other ways to do it. So again, we will abuse the authorization header, and the authorization header is really base 64 encoded user password. So we'll take the meaningful part has to be on the user. So we'll make our user to be that PHP info code, and password just the random password. And we'll have the authorization header with basic and that value. And we will see that that header is processed by the server, and it's taken to its log file, and it saves the username. Then when we include that log with our application, well, all other log entries are just being displayed. We don't care. This is the HTML mode of the parser, and the code will get executed. And this is the result of running it. As you can see, what's really is helpful for the hacker that usually the logs resides in the some default path, and also the application reside on some default path, and so the relation between them is known or very guessable for the hacker, so we can just traverse over the possible relations between the different paths, and be able to, in a few guesses, to get into the log files and execute them. Okay, now let's talk about abusing the upload functionality of file. This time the hacker objective is to upload a picture with no malicious code to create local file inclusion. And we want the picture appearance must not change, and antivirus must not detect the code. And let's first talk about the code. This time we will use an actual so-called malicious code, at least 24 antivirus on virustotal.com site recognize it as being malicious. This is just a test code used by hackers, and again, it was found in the wild in the same HII setup that I mentioned earlier. And it really just concats 2 times the fill comes string. And it's used by hackers just to test whether a page is vulnerable to RFI attack. So we begin with a code that is recognized by 24 antivirus. And we will embed it into a picture, into a JPEG picture. You probably know that JPEG also contains EXIF headers and properties, which allows for metadata to add metadata to the picture, such as the camera and date and so forth. And we just edited these properties. It's nothing special. This editor comes with Windows, and then submitted it to VirusTotal, and now only 3 out of 42 of the 42 antivirus recognize it. And so it's a progress, but we're not satisfied yet, since 3 antivirus still recognize it. So we decided to split the vector into 2 adjacent properties, thinking that maybe antivirus just looking at the code property by property and splitting it to 2 adjacent properties will confuse them. And indeed, that's what happened. And now only 1 antivirus recognized our malicious pictures with that embedded code. Okay, so now it gets personal. ClaimAV is detecting our code. So we took a specific look at the ClaimAV signature, and we see that the signature is really looking for a angle bracket $PHP inside in the first part. It's looking for the JFIF header of the JPEG image. So we noticed that the signature seems to be a little bit case sensitive, and we changed the case of the PHP in the beginning of of our code. And let's do a recap and see that everything is okay. We have uploaded a picture to our vulnerable site, and it really it runs. It prints fill columns twice and concat them, and picture appearance must not change. The pictures looks the same as it was if we access it directly on that site, and antivirus must not detect the code. And now that we have bypassed ClaimAV, then no antivirus, at least on VirusTotal, was able to recognize our malicious code, remembering that we started from 24 antiviruses recognizing it. So the mission was accomplished. And here comes the question, so why antivirus fail? And well, there are, I think, 2 main reasons. One is strategic, as a general purpose antivirus, and they are general purpose. They're not meant to fight LFI, and so they are looking for malicious code, where in the context of LFI, it is enough to detect any PHP code. So as an application owner, I say, I don't want any code embedded within the uploaded content. I don't care if it's malicious or not malicious. I don't want any code in my uploaded content. And somewhat of a tactical explanation is that AVs are usually designed to find compiled malicious code and find it, and PHP code is not compiled, but it's text, and finding malicious source code requires different set of features and awareness to text-related evasions, such as we saw with the signature of ClaimAV being sensitive to case. So let's, before we go on with our proposed mitigation for this kind of exploit, let's say what wouldn't work, what wouldn't detect abusive file upload. So we saw that antivirus are not a good solution to scan for local file inclusion. So we can set up and try to find, to develop something specific for LFI. So we can develop a degenerated PHP parser that looks only for PHP begin and end tags and tokens. But we have seen that looking for short tags that consist only of angle bracket and question mark yields many false positives, as many good benign files include them. We can compile the uploaded file and check if it's compiled. We can see this thing would work, but again, even benign documents are trivially compiled. We'll see some examples later. And we can run the file and see if it executes, but I don't think it would be a very good idea if the file is malicious. So what we are proposing is to use the VLD extension that we had shown earlier on this presentation, and just VLD disassemble the uploaded file. So we will compile the file with VLD, inspect the opcode, and we will do it in a manner that will not execute the file, just dump the opcode. So a non-PHP code-bearing file should yield only two opcodes, echo, as we've seen that non-PHP code gets echo and return in the end of the file, while documents that carry PHP code will be compiled into more than two opcodes files. And let's see it in action. The upper example is of the picture we've just seen, and we can see that it was compiled to echo and then concat fill comes, again echo and concat fill comes, and then return to the picture where it's echo again, and we see the number of operation is 7, while in if we try to compile with VLD a benign picture, we'll see only two opcodes, which is the echo and the return. So it's using a VLD, and we think it's a good way to find the code in uploaded files. So the last topic on this presentation is the observation, our observation on LFI and RFI in the wild. We have seen that indeed this is again was obtained by the setup we described earlier of the web security logs analysis, and we see that RFI and LFI are very relevant, as it consists of 20% of all web application attacks we had observed, and the LFI is more prevalent than RFI. We see that LFI is 3 times bigger than RFI, and it's very natural since 9% of PHP deployments are of versions that do not allow RFI by default, as we have seen. So it's very natural that we will see more RFI attacks than LFI attacks. And let's speak about RFI in the wild, and we see that the attack is highly automated. We see it through because of the different rates and the consistency of the attack, and the header really looks like automatic and not something produced out of browsers. And there are many consistent attackers. We can see that some attacks that consisted over 80 days from the same sources. And we can also see that many sources depicted in red attack more than one target, such as this group. These attackers attack more than one application. And if you remember, this is in a setup of only 40 web applications. We believe that if we had more data and we will have more web application, we'll see more connection, as the sources that attack one target, it doesn't mean that they really attack one target. They just attack one target that we monitor, but they could be attacking other targets that we do not monitor. Another analysis we had conducted is we have analyzed the shell hosting URLs. So when we saw in the security log an RFI attack, and the shell is the shell code is hosted in this is the URL is presented in red in this slide. Then we had downloaded the shell and verified it as a script to refrain from false positives, and we looked at the attacks from the perspective of the usage of that shell. So we had seen that some URLs are being used consistently. So this time, each point is symboling now the use of URL, and some URLs are being used for more than 30 days, the same hosted code. And so some of them are really consistent. And again, this time the shell URLs are in purple and the targets are green. And we see that some shells are being used against more than one target. And again, this is on the limited set we have. Maybe if we had a richer set, then we would see in a fuller picture that the URL is being used against many applications. And it really makes sense if you are already uploading a shell, and then you would try to make the most out of it and use it as much as possible in order to maximize the exploitation out of that shell. Okay, and now that we observe the behavior of RFI and LFI attacks in the wild, we can suggest a new approach of community-based RFI blacklists to fight back RFI and LFI, because since the attack characteristics, both the source analysis and shell URL analysis reveals that both sources and shell URLs are non-transient, and some of them are stable for days and even months. And also it's general, it's not if attacker attacks some application, there are good chances that he would be attacking other targets with the same characteristic. So by forming a community that shares RFI data, we can create a blacklist for both attack sources and attacker shell hosting URLs and achieve better protection. And when we had really done it and tested it, we had seen that using that blacklist, we were able to find some new RFI vectors. When we looked, it was revealed to us since we observed all the activity of the source, and so we were able to find out new RFI exploits, and we were able, just by knowing the source or just by knowing the shell. So we will conclude here. I was told to ask you to please complete the speaker feedback surveys. They should be online on Black Hat site. And are there any questions? Okay, thank you very much for being here.